What if the person you trusted most, the child you raised with every ounce of love, decided your life was worth more to him dead than alive? That's exactly what I discovered when my son invited us on a so-called family trip to the mountains. But it wasn't for sightseeing, or fresh air, or cherished memories. It was a trap, a carefully planned journey to erase us forever. Stay with me, because what happened next is a story of betrayal, survival, and the painful truth no parent ever wants to face. If this story touches your heart, I ask you to walk with me until the end, and if you find strength or healing in it, please support this channel so I can continue sharing these stories with you. My name is Samuel. I am 60 years old, and if you had asked me just a year ago what I thought about my life, I would have told you it was simple, honest, and filled with the kind of joys you only read about in old storybooks. I believed in family. I believed in the strength of hard work, in the security of a good home, and most of all, in the bond between a father and his children. For decades, my wife Margaret and I built what I thought was an unshakable foundation. We woke up every morning in our modest suburban home, the smell of her fresh coffee drifting through the kitchen as sunlight poured through the lace curtains. I worked with my hands as a carpenter, shaping raw wood into furniture that people said carried soul. Margaret had been a nurse before retirement, known in town for her gentle patience and her way of calming even the most stubborn patients. Together, we weren't rich, but we were proud. We thought we had everything we needed. We had 2 children, Daniel, our firstborn, and Evan, who came along 5 years later. Daniel was always full of light. He had that natural charisma that made people want to be around him. He laughed easily, helped me in the shop, and made sure his mother never carried groceries alone. He was the protector, the glue that seemed to hold us together. Evan, on the other hand, was quieter, more reserved. He often kept to himself, drawing in his notebooks or tinkering with little gadgets. Margaret would always remind me not to compare them, that each child blooms in their own season. And I believed her, because as a father, you want to believe you love them both equally, without condition or preference. At least, that's what I told myself back then. Sundays were sacred to us. After church, we would gather around the heavy oak dining table I had built with my own hands. It was the pride of our home, thick, sturdy, carved with patterns of vines and leaves along the edges. Daniel would chatter about his plans to study engineering, his eyes sparkling with excitement about college and the future. Evan usually sat in silence, poking at his food, offering only a few words when pressed. I used to think he was just shy, a dreamer lost in his own world. Life was steady, and in those moments I imagined growing old in that house, watching grandchildren run through the yard, sharing morning walks with Margaret until our hair turned completely white. On weekends, we hosted family gatherings. My sisters, Eleanor and Ruth, would come over with their husbands and children. The house would be alive with laughter, the smell of roasted chicken filling the air, kids chasing each other in the yard, women swapping recipes in the kitchen while the men fixed things around the house. Margaret would sometimes pause in the middle of all that noise, lean against the doorframe, and smile at me as if to say, "This is what happiness looks like." And I believed her. I had no reason not to. We had been married for over 40 years, and even after all that time, she still slipped wildflowers into my lunchbox, and I still built her small wooden keepsakes whenever I found the time. We were, in my mind, unbreakable, but perfect happiness often hides its cracks. You don't notice them until one day they widen into gaping wounds. That day came when Daniel was 20. He and Evan began to argue more often at first over trivial things, then over hushed conversations that stopped the second I entered the room. I dismissed it as sibling rivalry, the kind that comes and goes, but there was a tension in the air that made Margaret frown in the quiet of night when she thought I wasn't looking. Then came that October night 25 years ago that still haunts me. Daniel didn't come home for dinner. We waited. 10 o'clock. 11. Midnight. Evan claimed he was in his room studying, but when I glanced at him, something in his eyes unsettled me, like he knew something he wasn't saying. At dawn, the town searched for Daniel. Hours later, They found him at the bottom of a gorge. The police ruled it an accident, that he must have slipped in the dark. We buried him in the old churchyard, and my world collapsed. My eldest son, the light of our home, gone. At the funeral, Margaret clung to me, her sobs tearing into the silence. I was breaking too, but my attention kept drifting to Evan. He wasn't crying, he wasn't even trembling. He stood there with an expression so calm it chilled me. I told myself it was just his way of processing grief. That's what I needed to believe. Because the alternative that something darker was hidden beneath his silence was too much to face. After Daniel's death, Evan transformed. He became attentive, almost overly so. He helped with chores, visited my workshop more often, even cracked the occasional smile at Margaret's jokes. To her, it looked like healing, like he was trying to fill the space his brother had left behind. But in hindsight, I see it differently. He was perfecting a mask, hiding something far more sinister. Years passed. The rawness of grief dulled, though it never vanished. Evan married Claire, a woman from the next town over. She was charming, sweet, the kind of daughter-in-law Margaret had always hoped for. She called us Mom and Dad, brought pies to our house on holidays, and helped set the table with a smile that seemed genuine. Together, she and Evan had 2 children, a boy and a girl, and I dared to believe that life was giving us a second chance. I allowed myself to dream again. Maybe the worst was behind us, but life has a cruel way of circling back to the truths you've tried to bury. 6 months ago, Margaret and I decided to update our will. After decades of saving, between our house, the land my father had left me, and the money tucked away in the bank, we had nearly $200,000 to leave behind. It was Evan who insisted we see the lawyer. He said it with that familiar smile, the same one that used to make me proud but now feels like a knife in my memory. Dad, Mom, you're not getting any younger. It's important to get everything in order. Claire nodded along, holding Margaret's hand with those same fingers that, months later, would shove us toward death. I didn't see it then. I thought they were looking out for us. How foolish that thought seems now. At first, I convinced myself that Evan's sudden concern was genuine. He spoke with such conviction, such practiced warmth, that even my suspicion felt cruel. Claire, too, leaned in with her soft voice and delicate touches. She would brush Margaret's hair back as they sat at the lawyer's office, whispering, "We just want to make sure you're both protected. We love you so much." How could I, as a father, allow myself to believe that my only surviving son would wish me harm? No, I forced myself to accept their words as truth, because the alternative was unthinkable. The lawyer, Mr. Peterson, an old friend from church, laid out the options. We could create a trust for the grandchildren, divide everything evenly, or name Evan and Claire as direct heirs. It was Evan who pushed for the latter. "It'll be simpler," he said. "We'll make sure everything is handled fairly. Besides, when you're older, you'll need us. Better for us to have access to the resources to take care of you properly." His words slid out smoothly, almost too smoothly. Margaret's eyes softened. She always wanted to believe the best in people, especially in her children. Against the gnawing in my gut, we signed. Claire embraced Margaret afterward, whispering, "Now we're united forever." The phrase chilled me, though I couldn't explain why. The weeks that followed unsettled me in ways I couldn't ignore. Evan and Claire visited more often, but their conversations were different. They no longer asked about our health or brought the kids over just to see their grandparents. Instead, they scrutinized our house like vultures circling prey. "Dad, this place is too big for you," Evan said one evening. "You should consider selling before the market drops." Claire chimed in with a calculating smile. "A smaller apartment would be safer and easier for you both. The stairs here are dangerous at your age. What if one of you fell?" Margaret hesitated, but I saw her beginning to consider their arguments. She was practical by nature, and the thought of easing our responsibilities appealed to her. But for me, this house wasn't just walls and beams. It was a living memory. Every groove in the wood, every scratch on the floor told the story of our 40 years together. The kitchen where Margaret had baked hundreds of pies, the workshop where my calloused hands carved dreams into oak, the yard where Daniel once chased fireflies with Evan. The idea of selling it felt like burying all of that history. I resisted, and that's when Evan's tone changed. No longer soft, no longer coaxing, his voice hardened like steel. "You're being irrational, Dad. Do you want to fall down the stairs and leave Mom to deal with it alone? We're just trying to help." His words weren't laced with concern anymore. They were edged with frustration, even menace. For the first time, I heard my son speak to me not as family, but as an obstacle. Claire, always the actress, added her honeyed voice. "We only want the best for you both. It hurts to see you struggle when we could make things easier." That night, after they left, Margaret and I argued. It was rare for us, but my unease had grown too large to ignore. She thought I was being paranoid, too suspicious. I thought she was being too trusting. "Do you remember what Evan was like before Daniel died?" I asked quietly as we washed the dishes. Margaret paused, her hands submerged in soapy water, her brow furrowed. "He was distant, yes," she admitted. "But that was grief, Samuel. You can't keep holding that against him." I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to. But deep inside, a shadow had begun to grow. The shadow became darker when Evan asked for power of attorney over our finances. He said it so casually, so logically. "It's just a precaution," he explained while sipping tea in our kitchen, as though it already belonged to him. "If anything happens, illness, an accident, we can handle things without complications." Margaret almost nodded, but I saw through it. It wasn't precaution, it was control. The insistence in his voice was too sharp, too desperate. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the sound of Margaret's breathing beside me, and thought about Daniel. Memories flooded back the way Daniel used to shield me from worry, the way he smiled when he talked about taking care of us in our old age. He had promised us we would never be alone, and yet he was gone, and Evan was all we had left. My chest ached with the weight of that truth. The next morning, I called my sister Eleanor. I told her about Evan's pressure, about Claire's constant suggestions. Eleanor was silent for a long time before finally saying, "Doesn't it strike you as strange? Evan has his own business. He's never needed money from you. Why would he push so hard now, unless—" Her words trailed off, but I didn't need her to finish. I already knew what she was implying. That afternoon, when Evan and Claire came over again, I confronted him. We sat in the living room, the old oak coffee table between us, like a silent witness. "Son," I began slowly, "why is it so important for you to control our finances? Your mother and I are still in good health, still capable of making decisions." For a flicker of a moment, his face hardened. I saw something in his eyes I hadn't wanted to see: coldness, calculation. He masked it quickly with a smile, but it was too late. I had seen the truth. "It's not about control, Dad," he said, his voice tight. "It's about love, about responsibility. Someone has to be the adult in this family." That word responsibility sounded less like love and more like a warning. Claire placed her hand on my arm, her touch light but her grip firm. "We just want what's best for you," she whispered. But in her tone, there was a rehearsed finality, as though she was sealing a decision already made. Later that night, Margaret and I had another argument. She accused me of creating problems, of letting suspicion cloud my judgment. I countered with questions she didn't want to answer. "Do you remember the night Daniel died? Do you remember Evan's calmness, his silence at the funeral? Doesn't any of that strike you as odd?" Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Don't make me doubt him, Samuel. He's all we have left." Her words broke me. She was right in a way. Evan was all we had left, but what if all we had left was a wolf in our home? It was then that I realized I couldn't protect her or myself by staying silent. Something was terribly wrong, and I needed to uncover it. The unease that had been gnawing at me finally grew too large to keep inside. One night, after another tense visit from Evan and Claire, I sat at the kitchen table long after Margaret had gone to bed. The old clock on the wall ticked steadily, each sound louder than the last, like it was keeping time with my heartbeat. The shadows in the room seemed heavier than usual. and I couldn't shake the image of Evan's eyes, cold, calculating. The same eyes that once belonged to the little boy who used to cling to my hand on the way to school. Margaret found me hours later, hunched over the table, my hands clasped tightly as though in prayer. "Samuel," she whispered, her voice still heavy with sleep, "you're scaring me. What's going on?" I looked at her, and for the first time in decades of marriage, I didn't know how to protect her from the truth. I didn't even know if she could handle it. But the weight inside me was crushing, and I couldn't carry it alone any longer. So I told her. Not everything, not yet, but enough. I confessed that I had doubts about Evan's intentions, that his behavior reminded me of something I had tried to bury years ago. Margaret's face paled. "This is about Daniel, isn't it?" she asked, her hands trembling as they gripped the edge of the table. I nodded slowly. For 25 years, I had lived with a secret so heavy it poisoned my soul. The night Daniel died, I hadn't told her the whole story. I told her I had stayed home while the search party combed the woods. I told her I was as surprised as everyone else when they found his body in the gorge. But that wasn't true. The truth was far darker. That night, Daniel had come to me in the workshop. His face was flushed, his hands shaking as he clutched a stack of bank statements. "Dad," he said, his voice breaking, "Evan's been stealing from you, from all of us. I've been tracking it for months." He showed me the evidence: withdrawals, checks that didn't add up, money missing in small amounts at first, then larger sums. My head spun. I wanted to deny it, to tell him he was mistaken. But Daniel's eyes, filled with both anger and sorrow, left no room for doubt. "He needs to tell you himself," Daniel said. "If he doesn't, I will. Tomorrow." His words were resolute, sharp with determination. I tried to calm him, to convince him to wait, but he was unshakable. He stormed out of the workshop, into the night, and something inside me told me to follow. I found them at the gorge, my two sons, screaming at each other in the dark. Daniel was waving the papers, shouting accusations, his voice echoing through the canyon. "You're a thief. You're stealing from our parents." Evan's face twisted with rage. "You've always been the favorite, always had everything handed to you. This is my chance." The words cut through the night like knives. Then it happened. Daniel turned to walk away, saying he would tell us everything in the morning. Evan lunged at him. I saw the shove. I saw Daniel stumble, his arms flailing for something to hold on to, and then he was gone. The sound of his body crashing against the rocks below was a sound I will never forget. Evan froze, his face drained of color as he looked down into the darkness. Then he turned to me, his eyes wide, his body trembling. "It was an accident, Dad," he whispered hoarsely. "He slipped. He was going to hit me, and he lost his balance. Please, please believe me." And God help me, I did. I wanted so desperately to believe my son wasn't a murderer. I wanted to protect what little remained of my family, so I helped him. I walked him back home, told him to go to his room, and when the search party asked, I lied. I became his accomplice that night, binding myself to a secret that would rot away at my conscience for the next 25 years. As I told Margaret the truth, her face crumpled. Tears streamed down her cheeks, and her body shook as if she were freezing. "You knew," she whispered. "All these years you knew, and you said nothing." Her voice broke on the last word, and the sound of her devastation shattered me. "I thought it was an accident," I said, though even to my own ears the words sounded hollow. "I thought he would learn from it, change, become better. I thought—" My voice trailed off, because what I thought didn't matter anymore. The truth was laid bare, and it was unbearable. Margaret stood up, pacing the kitchen, her hands clutching her head. "Our son killed his brother, and you covered it up. For 25 years, Samuel." Her eyes locked onto mine, filled with a pain deeper than anything I had ever seen. "Do you realize what you've done to us? To me?" I couldn't answer. My throat was tight, my chest heavy. I had no defense. I had destroyed her trust, just as surely as Evan had destroyed our family. Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Finally, Margaret sank into a chair, her face buried in her hands. When she spoke again, her voice was low, broken. Now it all makes sense. Why he's so desperate for control, why he looks at us like we're in his way. She lifted her head, her eyes burning with new clarity. He killed his brother for money once. What's to stop him from killing us now? Her words sent a chill through me that I couldn't shake. She was right. Evan wasn't just desperate, he was dangerous. And for the first time, I realized that the son I had tried to protect might be planning to finish what he started all those years ago. We sat in that kitchen until dawn, too afraid to sleep, too afraid to move. When the phone rang the next day, and Evan's cheerful voice suggested a family trip to the mountains, Margaret and I looked at each other, and without speaking, we both knew the truth. He was inviting us to our deaths. When Evan called that morning, his voice was light, cheerful, almost musical, as though he were a boy again inviting us on some grand adventure. "Dad, Mom," he said, "how about a trip to the mountains this weekend? You've always talked about wanting to see those trails. It'll be a perfect way to celebrate your anniversary." His words might have sounded innocent to anyone else, but to me and Margaret, they were drenched in menace. This wasn't a gift, it was a sentence. I forced my voice to sound steady. "That's a thoughtful idea, son. Let us talk it over and get back to you." He agreed easily, too easily, before hanging up. The moment the line went dead, Margaret and I sat in silence, the air between us heavy as stone. She was pale, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "He's planning to kill us there," she whispered. "He'll make it look like an accident." I nodded, unable to say the words aloud, but knowing she was right. That night, we lay awake, whispering plans. Margaret wanted to refuse, to stay home and lock the doors, but I knew Evan well enough to understand that if we didn't go, he would find another way. A house fire, a staged burglary, poison slipped into our tea. No, the mountains, as horrifying as they sounded, might be our only chance. At least there, we could prepare. The following days were a blur of fear and preparation. I hid my phone in a jacket pocket, setting it to record at the slightest touch. If anything happened, I wanted the truth preserved. I even wrote a letter to my sister Eleanor, explaining everything: Daniel's death, my suspicions about Evan, the will, the sudden trip. I sealed it in an envelope and placed it with our important documents. If we didn't return, at least someone would know where to start. When Friday came, I could barely eat. Margaret made breakfast, but neither of us touched it. Every movement felt rehearsed, as though we were actors in someone else's twisted play. When Evan and Claire arrived, they were radiant, smiling like newlyweds on a honeymoon. Evan whistled as he loaded gear into the car, while Claire kissed Margaret's cheek, her touch lingering just a little too long. "This is going to be wonderful," she said. Wonderful for them, perhaps. For us, it was a march toward the gallows. The drive to the mountains was 2 hours long, yet it felt like an eternity. Claire played upbeat music, singing along, her laughter filling the car with false warmth. Evan drove carefully, stopping at every sign, never once speeding, like a man determined not to ruin the timing of a meticulously planned performance. Margaret squeezed my hand discreetly, and I pressed the record button on my phone. Everything from this moment forward would be captured, one way or another. When we arrived, the place was breathtaking. Towering pines stretched into the sky, their branches swaying gently in the crisp mountain air. The sound of a river trickled somewhere nearby, and wildflowers painted the slopes with bursts of color. But for me, it wasn't beauty, it was a death sentence, wrapped in pretty paper. Evan's eyes gleamed as he pulled on his backpack. "Ready for an adventure?" he asked. And for the first time since Daniel's death, I saw it again, that same glint in his eyes, the one that had stared into the abyss 25 years ago. The trail began gently, winding through moss-covered rocks and shaded by trees. Claire bounded ahead, snapping pictures with a new camera, her voice chirping with admiration for every flower, every bird. Evan lingered behind us, his footsteps measured, his gaze heavy on our backs. He asked if we needed to rest, his tone dripping with false concern. Every word was calculated, every movement a part of his act. After an hour, the path grew steeper. My legs ached, and Margaret's breathing grew ragged. Evan knew exactly what he was doing. He had chosen a trail that would exhaust us, weaken us. "We're almost at the lookout," Claire announced brightly, though I knew from the map I had glimpsed earlier that the real lookout was still an hour away. No, this was their chosen spot. Moments later, Claire pointed to a jagged outcrop rising above the trail. "Look at that view," she exclaimed. "Let's climb up and take some photos. It'll be special." My blood ran cold. The rocks were loose, the cliff sheer, the gorge below unforgiving. This wasn't just a viewpoint, it was a perfect stage for murder. "I don't think that's a good idea," I said, trying to sound casual. "Too dangerous for people our age." But Evan was already walking toward the path, his backpack filled with ropes, harnesses, and gear I knew he never intended to use. "Come on, Dad," he urged, smiling that familiar, sinister smile. "Just a few minutes. The photos will be spectacular." Margaret gripped my hand tightly, and I felt the hidden weight of my phone recording in my pocket. This was it. The trap was closing. The climb was grueling. Every step sent rocks tumbling beneath our feet. Every breath came heavy with dread. Claire moved quickly, her agility betraying practice, as though she had rehearsed this climb before. Evan followed, then offered us his hand for the last few feet. His touch felt like iron shackles. When we reached the top, the view was indeed spectacular. The valley stretched endlessly, the river glinting like silver in the distance, the sky, a brilliant canvas of blue. But to me, it was all a cruel backdrop. This wasn't a view to admire, it was the last sight we were meant to see. "Stand closer together," Claire called, raising her camera. "Hug each other. Smile." Her words were sugar-coated poison. Margaret and I obeyed, clinging to each other, our smiles brittle and forced. Evan moved behind us, positioning us with small adjustments, each step inching us closer to the edge. "One more step back," he said smoothly, "so the landscape shows better." Margaret's grip tightened painfully on my arm. We both knew. This was it. The words Margaret breathed into my ear were softer than the wind, but they struck me harder than a bullet. "Pretend we're dead." At first I thought she had lost her senses. How could anyone survive a fall like this? But when Evan's palm pressed against my back and I felt the terrifying emptiness of the gorge yawning beneath us, I understood. If they believed we were gone, it was the only chance we had left. I stumbled forward, Margaret clinging to me, and together we tumbled off the edge. For a split second, the world became nothing but a blur of sky and stone. My ears roared with the sound of rushing air, my heart clawed against my chest, and then impact. A hidden ledge, just a few feet below the edge, caught our fall. We landed hard, the air ripped from our lungs, sharp stone tearing at our skin. Margaret gasped, her hand slipping but not letting go. We lay still, both of us half on the ledge, half dangling over the abyss, the slightest movement threatening to send us tumbling to our true deaths. Above, I heard Claire scream. Not a scream of horror, but of shock disguised as grief. "Oh my God, Evan, they fell." Her voice trembled, but there was something rehearsed about it, like a poorly played part in a play. Evan's boots scraped against rock as he leaned over, his shadow stretching across the cliff face. I pressed my cheek into the cold stone, holding my breath, feeling Margaret trembling beside me. "It's done," he muttered. His voice was low, calm, chilling. No one could survive that. Claire's response was quieter, but I heard every word. "Finally, we're free." Ensadu. Their footsteps retreated, slow at first, then faster, until all that remained was the sound of loose gravel rolling down the slope. I didn't move. I couldn't. My entire body screamed for air, for relief, but Margaret's hand clutched mine, pressing hard, a silent command. "Don't. Breathe. Loud." We stayed like that, still as corpses, while the minutes stretched into eternity. A hawk circled overhead, its cry echoing across the canyon like a taunt. My chest burned, my arms shook, but I forced myself to stay limp. At last, the sounds above faded completely. Only then did Margaret whisper, her lips against my ear, Don't move yet. He might come back. And he did. Not 10 minutes later, the crunch of boots returned. I froze again as Evan's shadow passed above us. He crouched, peering over the edge, scanning the gorge below. My blood turned to ice. He was checking, making sure. My body ached to cough, to groan, but I clenched my jaw until I tasted blood. Claire's voice called from a distance. "Evan, come on. It's dangerous." He lingered a moment longer, then finally pulled back. "They're gone," he said, louder this time, as if reassuring himself as much as her. Their voices faded for good, and I allowed myself the shallowest breath. Hours passed before we dared to shift. My back throbbed with every heartbeat, my legs scraped raw from stone, but we were alive. Alive, because of Margaret's whisper. "Pretend we're dead." As the sun lowered, shadows deepened, and the mountain air turned bitter cold. Margaret shivered against me, her skin pale, lips quivering. I wrapped my arm around her, my body shielding hers as best I could. "We'll survive this," I whispered, though the words sounded weak even to me. She turned her eyes toward me, filled with both terror and a quiet strength I had always admired. "We can't go home, Samuel. Not yet. He'll find us. He'll finish it." Her voice cracked, but her conviction was clear. That night was the longest of my life. We lay on that narrow ledge, pressed against cold rock, every sound magnified. From above, faint traces of their voices drifted down Evan's laugh, smooth and boyish, Claire's giggle following like an echo. It was grotesque, hearing them laugh as though nothing had happened, as though they hadn't just shoved us toward death. Then I heard Claire's words, carried faintly by the wind. "Tomorrow we'll call the police. Say it was an accident. They'll believe us." The word accident seared into me, the same word Evan had used 25 years ago when Daniel fell. He had whispered it then, begging me to believe. Now he was weaving the same lie into our deaths. Accident. A word that covered sins with a thin sheet of plausibility. I clenched my fists, nails digging into my palms, blood mixing with dirt. My body might have been broken, but my mind was awake, raging. I had lived under that word for too long. Accident had buried Daniel. Accident had silenced me. Accident was about to erase us too, unless we fought back. When dawn painted the horizon, Margaret stirred, her voice no stronger than a sigh. "We can't stay. If they check again." She didn't need to finish. I nodded. With every ounce of strength left, we inched sideways, clinging to rock, searching for a path down. Loose gravel slid beneath our feet, small stones tumbling into the abyss, but by some miracle, we found a sloping path leading into the forest below. The climb down was agony. My knees screamed with every step, my hands raw from gripping sharp stone. Margaret's ankle twisted on a loose rock, swelling instantly, but she bit back her cry, teeth clenched in silent defiance. I tried to carry her, but she shook her head violently. "If you fall, we both die." When we reached the forest line, I collapsed against a tree, lungs burning, heart pounding. The woods stretched endlessly, a labyrinth of shadows and twisted roots. Every sound, every crack of a branch, every rustle of leaves made me jump. In my mind, Evan's boots were always just behind us, his shadow stretching across the trees. We followed the sound of water, stumbling toward a river that cut through the valley. We drank greedily, the cold water burning our throats, washing blood from our faces. Hunger gnawed at us, sharp and relentless, but survival drove us forward. We ate berries we prayed weren't poisonous, chewing bitter leaves to keep the gnawing ache at bay. At night, we huddled beneath branches, the cold biting through our torn clothes. Sleep came in broken fragments, haunted by dreams of Daniel. I saw his face, young and bright, shouting warnings I hadn't heeded. I saw him falling again and again, his screams swallowed by the gorge. Every time I woke, gasping, guilt tightened its grip around my throat. Margaret whispered one night, her voice breaking, "Do you think God can forgive us for covering for him, for letting this happen?" Her question cut deeper than the rocks had. I stared into the darkness, the weight of her words pressing on me. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice hoarse. "But I know Daniel would want us to try. To live." So, 3 days passed like that: hunger, cold, fear. Yet something fierce kept us moving. Survival wasn't just instinct, it was defiance. Evan thought he had erased us, but we were still here. Every step forward was a rebellion. Every breath, a refusal to be silenced. On the 4th day, when I thought my legs would give out for good, we stumbled into a clearing. And there, standing humble against the trees, was a ranger station. A small wooden cabin, green paint peeling, but to us it shone like salvation. My knees buckled, tears springing to my eyes. I banged on the door with what little strength I had left. When it finally opened, the ranger's face went pale at the sight of us, bruised, bleeding, filthy, trembling. "Help us," I rasped. Our son tried to kill us." He ushered us inside, wrapped us in blankets, pressed water into our hands. As the fire's warmth seeped into my bones, I realized something. Surviving the fall, the wilderness, the hunger, that was only the first part. The hardest part still lay ahead. We had to tell the truth. About Evan, about Daniel, about ourselves. Margaret's hand found mine. Her grip was firm now, steady. "We're not dead yet," she whispered, "and we won't let him win." And for the first time in decades, I felt something spark inside me, not just fear, not just guilt, but hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to fight back. The ranger who found us, Thomas, was young, with sunburnt skin and calloused hands that spoke of years spent among the pines. He listened with an expression caught between skepticism and pity as Margaret and I tried to explain. 2 broken, half-starved old people stumbling out of the woods, claiming their own son had tried to murder them. It must have sounded like madness. His gaze flickered more than once, as though he wasn't sure if he was looking at victims or lunatics. But then Margaret pulled from her pocket the folded letter I had written for Eleanor. My hands had been too shaky to carry it down the mountain, but Margaret had tucked it close to her chest the whole way. Thomas read it, his eyes scanning every desperate word, every detail I had scrawled in the trembling dark. When he lifted his head, his face had hardened. He didn't look at us with pity anymore. He looked at us like people in danger. "We need to get you both to town immediately," he said. "The sheriff has to hear this. You'll be safe there." Those words, "safe there," rang hollow in my ears. I had believed in safety once, in family dinners and church pews, and the steady hum of a life built on trust. But that trust had been shattered long ago, first on the night Daniel died, and now again on the cliff where my younger son pushed me towards silence. Still, I let Thomas help us into the jeep. I held Margaret's hand, feeling the bones sharp beneath her skin, both of us too weak to fight anything anymore except the truth. At the sheriff's office, the smell of stale coffee and paper filled the air. Sheriff Donnelly was a large man with a graying beard, the kind of presence that seemed immovable, like an oak tree. He listened as Margaret spoke, her voice trembling but clear, her words spilling out like water breaking through a dam. She described the climb, the shove, Claire's cold whisper. When my turn came, I forced the words out, each one heavier than stone. But Donnelly was not quick to reassure. He leaned back, his chair creaking, his eyes sharp beneath heavy brows. "You understand what this sounds like," he said evenly. "A tragic accident in the mountains. Your son and his wife grieving, telling one story. You, another. Without proof, it's nothing but suspicion." And panic flared in my chest until I remembered the phone in my pocket. My fingers trembled as I fumbled to unlock it, scrolling until I found the recording. I pressed play, and the room filled with Evan's voice. "It's done. No one could survive that." And then Claire's chilling whisper. "Finally, we're free." Donnelly replayed it twice, his jaw tightening. When he looked at us again, his eyes were different. "This is something," he said slowly, "but it won't be enough on its own. Courts don't deal in suspicion. They deal in facts. If you want justice, you'll need to bring everything forward. No more secrets. Those words sliced into me deeper than the fall ever had. No more secrets. He didn't know what he was asking, not fully. Or maybe he did. Margaret's eyes turned to me, brimming with tears, silently begging me to do what I should have done long ago. So I told him. I told the sheriff about Daniel, about the night he stormed into my workshop clutching papers, accusing Evan of theft, about the confrontation at the gorge, the shove, the fall, about the sound of my eldest son's body breaking against the rocks, a sound that had lived in my nightmares for 25 years. And I told him how I had lied, convincing myself it was an accident, burying the truth to protect the son who had just revealed himself as a murderer in waiting. Margaret sobbed beside me, but her hand never left mine. Donnelly's eyes stayed fixed on me, hard but not unkind. When I finished, the silence in the room was suffocating. Finally, he leaned forward. "The truth is heavy, Samuel. But you're carrying it now, and that gives us a chance. We'll need you both to stand strong." The next days blurred into a haze of interviews, signed statements, hushed conversations with lawyers and deputies. We were placed in a safe house, a small cabin at the edge of town, watched over by deputies who sat parked outside through the night. Still, I barely slept. Every gust of wind sounded like Evan's footsteps. Every shadow reminded me of his eyes. Margaret prayed aloud each evening, her soft whispers filling the silence like a shield made of faith. Then the news came. Evan and Claire had reported us missing. They told police we had slipped while hiking. Their grief was convincing enough that the town rallied to comfort them. They even arranged a memorial service at the church. Margaret let out a bitter laugh when Donnelly told us. "They buried us already," she said, "but they're about to learn the dead can still speak." The sheriff's plan was dangerous. He wanted us to attend the memorial in secret, to reveal ourselves in front of witnesses. "They think you're gone," he explained. "The shock will break them. Their reaction will say more than a dozen testimonies." The morning of the service, Margaret and I sat hidden in the back of Donnelly's cruiser. My stomach churned as we watched people file into the church, their heads bowed, their clothes dark. Through the open doors I could hear hymns drifting out, voices heavy with sorrow for the loss of two people who weren't lost at all. When Evan appeared at the steps, Claire on his arm, my throat tightened. His face was the picture of grief, eyes red-rimmed, jaw trembling just enough to look human. Claire clung to him, leaning into his shoulder, her expression the perfect mask of a grieving daughter-in-law. They accepted hugs, murmured thanks, played the part flawlessly. The town believed them, every single one. I had to grip Margaret's hand to stop myself from storming inside. Rage boiled in me. Rage not just at what Evan had done, but at myself, for ever allowing him to grow into this. My son, standing there, soaking in sympathy he hadn't earned, preparing to speak over a grave that should have been his brother's, not ours. Donnelly squeezed my shoulder. "Wait," he said softly. "Let them reveal themselves." The service ended. People drifted outside, still whispering condolences, still patting Evan on the back, as though he were a victim, not a monster. And then Donnelly gave the signal. Margaret and I stepped out of the car. My legs wobbled beneath me, but we walked forward, slow and steady, until we were in full view of the church steps. Conversations died mid-sentence. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Evan looked up. The color drained from his face so quickly it was as though the blood itself had abandoned him. Claire's mouth dropped open, her hand flying to her chest. For a moment, time itself froze. Then it shattered. Evan stumbled backward, words tumbling out of his mouth in a broken stammer. "You, how?" His voice cracked, panic breaking through the practiced calm. Claire grabbed his arm, her nails digging into the fabric of his suit. The crowd murmured, confusion turning to suspicion. Donnelly stepped forward, his voice clear and commanding. "We need to talk, Evan, right now." Evan tried to regain his composure. He spread his hands, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "This is a miracle," he said loudly, his voice too eager. "They must have been found after all. Praise God, they're alive." But his words rang hollow. The recording was played, the cold truth echoing across the churchyard. "It's done. No one could survive that." And Claire's whisper, "Finally, we're free." The congregation stared at them, horrified. Claire broke first. Her tears spilled down her cheeks as she whispered, "I told you this would happen. I told you we shouldn't have done it." Gasps erupted. Evan's face twisted with rage, the mask gone. "Shut up!" He spat at her, his voice venomous. But it was too late. Deputies surged forward, snapping handcuffs around their wrists. The crowd looked on in stunned silence as Evan and Claire were led away, their cries swallowed by the murmur of disbelief. Evan's eyes locked on mine one last time. There was no regret in them, no sorrow, only hatred. Hatred as sharp and cold as the rocks at the bottom of the gorge. But for the first time in 25 years, I felt the weight on my chest ease. The truth was out. Daniel's voice, silenced for so long, finally echoed again. Margaret leaned into me, her tears soaking my shirt, and I realized that survival wasn't about clinging to life at any cost. It was about facing the truth, no matter how painful, and refusing to let lies define us any longer. When the handcuffs closed around Evan's wrists and the deputies led him away, I thought I would feel triumph. But standing there, with the crowd's whispers swirling and Margaret's tears soaking into my shirt, what I felt was something different, something heavier, but also freeing. It wasn't victory, it was truth. For 25 years I had buried the truth under excuses, under fear, under the desperate hope that love could erase sin. I thought by protecting Evan, I was saving our family. But in reality, all I did was feed the darkness that eventually turned back against us. Love without truth is not love at all. It is a lie, and lies will always rot from the inside out. I learned too late that silence is its own kind of violence. I thought I was sparing Margaret the pain, sparing myself the shame, but my silence stole Daniel's voice and nearly cost us our lives. If you carry secrets in your family, if you bury pain thinking it will go away, it won't. It festers, it grows, it will come back to claim you. But even in the wreckage, there is hope. Margaret and I walked away from that mountain broken but alive. We stood before our community in shame, but also in courage. And though we cannot bring Daniel back, we can finally speak his name without choking on lies. His truth has a voice again. So if you take anything from my story, let it be this. Do not bury the truth. Do not let fear silence you. Speak, even if your voice trembles. Confront the darkness, even if it lives under your own roof. Love fiercely, but love honestly. Because love without honesty is not love, it is surrender. And if you, like me, have carried guilt or secrets that weigh you down, know this. It is never too late to step into the light. It is never too late to heal. Margaret and I are still here. We are scarred. Yes, but we are not dead. We will not let him win. And neither should you let fear, shame, or silence win in your life. If this story touched you, if it reminded you of the power of truth and the cost of silence, stay with us. There are more stories, more lessons, more journeys we can walk together. And maybe, just maybe, by sharing these truths, we can help heal not just ourselves, but one another.